We've all heard of women's intuition, right? Well, men have intuition as well. Intuition is so important when it comes to feeding ourselves and our families in our challenging food environment. This podcast explores a variety of topics related to a powerful, evidence-based eating framework called intuitive eating that integrates instinct, emotion, and rational thought. My hope is that it will help you finally break free of the perpetual diet cycle. This is the Men's Intuition Podcast. All right, and welcome back to another episode of the Men's Intuition Podcast. This is actually the first episode that will be released in 2023. So I'm excited to have a guest with me today. And this is AD Aleman, and he is a Jewish husband and father, helping Jewish dads make eating and exercise easy and stress-free so they can get back to being their best. He grew up wanting to be a professional baseball player. I think I can relate to that as a kid who played baseball myself and having that desire. But even though getting bigger, faster, and stronger in college, he didn't make the team, and professional ball seemed to basically stay a dream. But he started to train others. Then he wanted to help men make change that lasts using intuitive eating. And now he's coaching and not looking back. And so I'm excited to have him on today. I've been enjoying following his content over on Instagram, and later on he'll tell you how you can connect with him over there and follow that as well. And so it's been great getting to know him some. And so I'm really excited to have him on the podcast today. So without any further ado, welcome.
Thank you. So happy to be here. I'm definitely enjoying all the guys and everyone you bring in on your shows and seeing what you have to talk about.
Yeah, great. I love when I come across other guys doing this kind of work, because as you know, it's not the most common thing out there. Lots of women doing it, which is fantastic. And I know I'm sure you've learned a lot from them, as I have. But it's nice to have. I think when guys are hearing from other guys, and it's like, oh, so this is for guys too. That's great. So I think that helps a lot.
No, definitely.
Yeah. So, well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into coaching and why you use a weight neutral intuitive eating approach?
Sure. So I'm 31 years old, and I grew up in LA, over here by LAX in Westchester. And what I known as just a normal public school, went to high school, and then definitely wanted to get drafted right out of high school, playing baseball. And that didn't happen. So started to look for colleges to see where I could fit in terms of the baseball team. And then like my mom in the background saying, okay, just in case, maybe like you want to do engineering or something. So I followed those schools as well. And I was a little surprised, like there weren't any Division I offers and not so many scouts at our games and like junior, senior year of high school baseball. So I went to a couple of these camps and ended up going to one in San Diego, UC San Diego. And I definitely liked the coaches, the school, and they had a nice engineering, good baseball team. And so I ended up talking to the coaches, and they said, well, there's not like we don't have a full ride for you. We don't really do that. You're welcome to come as a recruited walk-on. So that's you can show up, you're invited to the fall. And there's a lot of training then. And at the end of the fall, they decide like who's going to be on the spring team, like the main team. So that's the direction I went. And so that was back in 2009. That was end of high school, then that first semester in college. And I was surrounded by very high level baseball. And I thought definitely I raised my game and thought I had a good shot. I played a couple different positions for the team. And one of the coaches said, the head coach wants to talk to you in his office. Like, oh, uh-oh. Like, what does that mean? Like in the weeks prior, seeing a couple guys leave over here and then over there. Mm-hmm. And so got to sit down and said, well, we don't have space for you on this team. There's lots of good guys. We love how you play. Just right now, it's not the time. So that was really, really hard to hear. And then it's like, sure. Okay, get back in the huddle and go clean up, go rake the field and stuff. Like trying not to cry.
Yeah.
Like saying, see you later, guys. So that was a really big shift. So that was like the fall, like Thanksgiving time, and didn't really know what to do. And some of the guys were like, oh, well, some guys go play lacrosse. Like, oh, okay. I never really hit anybody, but I guess I'll give it a shot. I did that for like 2 weeks and got knocked over by guys twice my size, and had my fair share.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then that spring, kind of played some like pickup baseball here and there, and the following year tried out for the baseball team again. Didn't make it, so did that every year. But my second year there, we started a club baseball team. So that was just a student run. Nobody was really yelling. Good baseball players, got to travel, have some fun.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like through college, and still in the back of my head, I was like, well, maybe there's going to be like this one guy, like seeing the one perfect game that we're playing, and they're like, hey, you should come try out for the Dodgers. So that dream was still kind of there. Definitely
Yeah.
loved playing. So by the time 2013, graduated college, didn't have any offers to play professional baseball. Didn't have any offers for engineering work. So a few months later, I went to Israel, and that was a really fantastic experience. Like throughout college, I was learning with a rabbi and going to some of the social events and learning events, and definitely getting more in touch with my Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the end of college, I was in a place that, okay, I'm not like tied down to any work. I don't have any thing to really stay in LA for the second. So I took a 3-week trip, and that was to Jerusalem, and it was like a learning intensive, and then like some traveling. I fell in love with Jerusalem, and I saw that, wow, this kind of Judaism is something I really want to do every day, and I want to learn more.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, it's like, well, I don't really have so much money in my pocket right now. I need to figure out work, and where do I go from there? I ended up coming back to LA, and worked a little bit with my father doing electrical work, and I was fine. At the same time, like trying to find engineering positions, like more of like a career,
Yeah.
and do that thing. But really felt weird because I wanted to figure out Judaism and how I could do that every day, and then at the same time, like figure out work. So it was a lot going back and forth, and eventually went back to Israel for a longer stay. So that was the end of 2013. And so I stayed there 2017, 2018, like going back and forth a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And we got married in LA in 2018 in January. So that was definitely a big life-changing kind of moment.
Yeah,
and,
definitely. Getting married, it's a big change.
Yeah. So then I came back to Israel, and now having someone else in my life, it was its own learning experience on its own. In terms of like what we're talking about, health and fitness, the biggest thing that came up was just how I approached eating and exercise. My wife was there and definitely noticing. Like, wait a minute, I'm making pasta for dinner, and I told her, well, no, I don't eat pasta. What do you mean?
Yeah.
So I had a kind of list of things that I don't eat or don't try to eat, and then she had a list of things that she cooked, and so they didn't seem to match so well, and that was kind of a little bit of a debate.
Mm-hmm.
She said, "Well, just like I don't know what you're doing. Just read this book, learn about intuitive eating." And I was like, "Oh, like being like freshly married, like okay, this will be a nice discussion. I can talk with my wife."
Mm-hmm.
And but I like honestly, I read it and took it in. I was like, "Wow, this is insane." I've like noticed there's tons of disordered eating and disordered practices that I thought I was doing to like be healthy, to be fit, to be athletic, and it took like an outside observer, my wife, to show me that there's some things that aren't so healthy. Like even though you think they're healthy, maybe try to reevaluate them.
Mm-hmm.
So that was back in 2018. I read the book and started practicing some of these ideas and saying like, wow, like this is there's something to this, and I want to learn more. I want to put this into practice for my own life. And that was 2018, 2019. And so that time we were in Israel. I was in yeshiva, so it's like a place where the men learn Torah, learn Judaic studies. I'm definitely enjoying that. We were getting to a point where we're ready to come back to LA and start to make a living and support a family. So like in the meantime, I would train guys one-on-one, just in the gym at yeshiva at the school. And that was fun. It was easy. I enjoyed it. They enjoyed it. I listened to fun music and I did it like a couple one-on-ones, couple groups. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can do this in LA. I mean, there's people in LA, people want to train. I was talking to some people and they're saying, no, I mean, it's like pretty hectic and you have to do this and that. So I started like steer away from that and figure out like, well, I guess I can do engineering. And so I tried to do that and look for jobs and got into construction. It's like pretty similar, but at the same time, there's like something missing from me. Like I felt like I wasn't contributing to my community in a way that I really could, and like to express all my powers and efforts. So I got into coaching. That was a year and a half ago, and to see there's a big difference from just like going to someone's house and jumping up and down with them and having a good time and exercising.
Yeah, definitely.
And like for that half hour, it was a good session. And then they stay home. I go home. And then for the week in between, it's like nothing changed really, or they changed like a drop. So
yeah,
I really figured out how to, in myself, wanted to have an impact that was greater than just like a drop. So I found coaching and got into different books and methods, and took a coaching course, and so like, wow, this is something big, and I think this is what I want to do. So that was last year, and been doing that, meeting people, telling them this is what I do, and making clients, and seeing like this is something I love doing, and this is something that they're changing in their lives for hopefully a long time.
Yeah, well, that's great. I think that's important. That's, I'd say, similar in a lot of ways. Obviously, completely different story, but similar kind of how I got into the coaching thing too, was the desire to help people and to serve people and to invest in other people and help them navigate things that I've been able to work through myself, and that I've, that resonate with me. And it sounds like that's kind of what happened with you too, is you came from this background, this, very somewhat rigid in the way that you looked at your nutrition, and then intuitive eating opened your eyes up to, this isn't necessary. And then of course, when you start digging into it, as you start finding out that, I don't have to restrict these things. I can still be super healthy. And I mean, even if you are very, very focused on like the details of your nutrition, it's really interesting when you look at the science of it that it's not necessary to cut out these foods and things too. Right. So even for those who aren't quite ready to embrace intuitive eating, it's still, you can still eat pasta and carbs and sugar and all of those things and still be very healthy. And in fact, who knows? I mean, it may have helped improve your performance had you been eating some of those things too, because some of those foods are they give us a lot of good energy and a lot of good nutrition.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Now, when you talked about your, we're going to talk about some of your faith stuff later, because I think that's also an important aspect of this. But you talked about your desire to play professional baseball, and so obviously you're pushing yourself in training and that kind of thing. Did you ever find yourself overtraining or pushing your body harder than you should? And maybe have you ever seen that in some of the people that you worked with as a coach too, and seen that tendency?
Yeah. So in terms of overtraining, I guess it depends like how you define it. Like in one particular exercise, I would like run very hard, and if it's in the weight room, I would go to my max, like within, like still trying to hold form. I think as like an overall approach, I definitely did overtrain in terms of probably more in college, when that was like a very intense, there's hour weightlifting 3 times a week in the morning, and then almost like 3 hours Monday to Friday in the afternoons. Probably like a month and a half, 2 months into that, I went to the trainer and they looked at my quads. They're like, you have like no mobility. I don't know how you're running. They were just like so tight. So in terms of like that one, like a one practice, like I wouldn't like throw up or something from running too hard, but I don't think I gave my body hardly as much as it needed in terms of food and rest, and definitely like injury prevention. Like my ankles got pretty beat up, and I kind of just like, okay, tape them up and let's go.
Yeah.
Which like might be like an approach for like one specific game, but it was like every practice. Like it's a fall season, it's like 6 months away from
Yeah.
any sort of season. It's just like go and go. So that I would say was like overtraining and just like under recovery. So that's a word.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely did some of that myself too. I mean, I played baseball in high school, but I wasn't quite as serious about it. I had fun with it, and I started and stuff, but I wasn't planning to go to college and play ball. But I did get into competitive rock climbing, and we climbed 7 days a week and for hours every day, and we'd ditch school and go climbing and all that stuff, climb all weekend. But when our tendons in our fingers started acting up, we just tape them up. And instead of letting them rest, you just tape them up like you would for tennis elbow, but you do that on your fingers. So the same kind of thing. You just kind of habitually and chronically just kept pushing through that. And that's certainly not the way to do things. But do you ever has your attitude changed in as far as training mentality and mentality around exercise and that kind of thing since kind of discovering intuitive eating? Because one of the principle number 9 is this kind of rethinking, reimagining how exercise, the word exercise, and thinking more in terms of like movement and that kind of a thing. So not so much of a focus on it. How has that changed for you?
That's definitely changed a ton. Like after college, like I was still kind of doing the same. I'm going to lift heavy. I'm going to try to get my sprints in throughout the week. And so I'd still kind of do that. I'd play baseball and still want to be able to perform like I used to. But then like 2018, like after getting married and seeing like, wow, exercise is not what I thought it was. And so I kind of changed it to, let me just, I want to be able to continue to have like my strength and flexibility and mobility. So I'm just going to do things that help with that. So a lot of that changed to like body weight exercises. Like we didn't have like a commercial gym or anything. So some of it was just like practical, and other things it was like, I kind of just enjoyed that aspect of it, being able to control my body this way and like push-ups and pull-ups and that way. And with that, I wasn't also training to be super extreme on anything. So it was just like, it was fun. I liked the challenge of it. And then when I got to a point, it's like, okay, I know I did a lot of stuff here, so that's good. Let's go stretch, get some water. I think is that the whole question?
Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah, that's kind of the same thing that I'd say my mentality changed a lot in that same way, where it was less about the like never missing a workout and making sure that I hit all of my numbers every session and pushed myself to exhaustion each time, to basically saying, sometimes I do that because it feels good. I enjoy it sometimes, pushing myself. And other times I just feel better going in and doing something. And it's not really, not viewing it as a cop out, back in the day, this kind of brings up, well, something we'll talk about in a little bit. Oh, might as well talk about it now. A big part of the competitive sports is kind of pushing yourself as well as being pushed by others. And like your coaches, fellow players, parents, whatever. So much of intuitive eating emphasizes this kind of gentle aspect, compassion, giving yourself grace, that kind of thing. Looking at things as learning experiences instead of failures and those kinds of things. Do you feel like there's a place for toughness and grit, doing hard things that might not be fun, discipline, sucking it up at times, those kinds of things with intuitive eating? Have you found a balance with that? Do you use that with in coaching people? I'm kind of curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think this is definitely like something that I'm actively thinking about. Like, how do I still combine like kind of some of the aspects and attitudes that I did learn from baseball and that I enjoyed, but then also kind of playing into more of like the caring, loving side of myself. But like in terms of working with clients, it kind of depends on like where they're holding, like what they're up to. So if they're just like very frazzled and don't know how to even just make time to have a call together, then I mean I'll probably start with some. I mean I call it like lover energy, just like more compassion, just saying, hey, I know stuff's really hectic right now, and then like when I sense or they say that like they're felt like they're heard, they're understood, then I kind of would shift into a little bit more of like a coach aspect where it's a little more like I call it warrior, but it's more a little more firm. Like, hey, so what's going on? And that's like a space for them to play into integrity and like, hey, you made a commitment. What's happening? Like, oh, it didn't work out. You didn't have time. So, oh, is that something that's outside of just making time for exercise, or this is something that you kind of play to more often than you'd like to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's good. The kind of feeling it out and figuring out when they're ready to hear certain things, maybe ready not to hear certain things. Personality too. I mean, based on what the individual wants. One of the things that I find is that, you know, with different people, they need something different. They want something different, and that it's important to find out not only what they want, but sometimes help them to figure out what it is that they really need. So sometimes people will say, oh, I need this, or I want this. And I like to make sure that they have autonomy. I'm not going to tell somebody what they want or what they need. But at the same time, sometimes it's clear that maybe they would really benefit from taking a different approach or from something else. And so might help them to kind of discover that on their own. With different people, I think that we can apply it in different ways. You know, I have myself as an example. I do ninja training, and so my training is a little bit more structured, and I push myself a little harder, and like to see progress in different things more. But then I have some clients, and I have one who's probably my most consistent exerciser of anybody I've ever worked with. I mean, he just doesn't miss his workouts, but he's also only done 4 a week. So he's given himself a very reasonable amount. He is super consistent with it. He prefers not to push himself super hard. So his workouts are like a 7 out of 10 for intensity, and they're always about that, which is cool. His progress, he's slowly making progress. He's enjoying it, has no issues, doesn't need pushed and that kind of thing. And so, you kind of see these different personalities where other people may want that accountability, and they actually want you to say, hey, call them out on things and stuff like that. And so I think it's good to have that, that flexibility and that variety of approaches with the individual. I mean, it really just comes back to, hey, what does the individual want? And there's plenty of room for that, I think, with intuitive eating. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think definitely there's, like, I'll talk to people and they, like, I was thinking about going to the gym and like don't really want to. And I tell them, it's like, well, I'm not going to make you go to the gym. We're going to find something that you actually enjoy, some sort of movement. And like, if we're ready, if we want to figure out some strength training and just kind of shift a bit of mindset to figure out how that looks differently than maybe used to, then we'll go that route. But sometimes it's just like, what are you interested in? I was like, oh, maybe some martial arts class. Oh, okay. So let's see what's in your neighborhood. Like, oh, okay. And they're like, feel
like, oh, I can do
comforted. That. Yeah. They feel a lot better that, oh, this is also me being healthy and finding movement that's easy and fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, a lot of times they're surprised to find out that, hiking counts, like going for a hike on the weekend, or working out in the yard for a few hours. Does that count? I have to do my little air quotes here if you're listening, but that counts as movement. And it's like, yeah, I mean, all those things are good for our bodies. And it's really interesting, the research to these areas with physical activity, that you get so many of the low hanging fruit benefits just from being physically active. And of course, you're going to be more likely to do it if you're doing stuff that you find fun, interesting, that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that was also a really big shift in my exercise, that I would have like 4 days a week where it's like all intense. And then like running, like now and then, like maybe think about going to play soccer, but then still having like a go do sprints after soccer. Like no, like soccer, baseball, whatever the activity is, that's my movement for the day. That's my activity. And
Yeah.
I enjoy that activity way better and just like feel a lot better after.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You mentioned that because it's easy to say, oh well, I did go for a hike, or I went and played at the park with my kids, or I played a pickup game of basketball or baseball or tennis or whatever it is, and then you think, oh, but I didn't lift any weights, so I guess I need to do some push ups and crunches at least, to get that. And it's like, no, you don't. You don't have to do anything like that, and if you like it, go for it. I mean, hey, if that's something that you find enjoyable, then by all means. I mean, when I was climbing, we trained hard. We trained multiple hours a day, and and it was fun. I mean, I enjoyed all of it. So
Yeah.
for me at that time, that was joyful movement, so to speak. But it's really easy to get caught up in thinking, oh well, I used to do this, and that's another thing I hear. Do you ever hear that from people? Oh, I used to do X, Y, and Z. And so now all I'm doing is, this. So I used to work out 6 days a week. Now all I'm doing is 2 or 3. Um, and I think it's really interesting when you're able to help people see that, hey, that's okay too, if that's what works for you.
Yeah, definitely. I talk to people like, hey, so like, what did you do in the past that worked? What didn't work? And they would say like they did have a routine, and then they'd shift over and talk about how they're doing today, and it kind of like the tone like shifts to more like shame. It's not like really heavy, but it's like, man, I wish I could do this and that. So I help them like reframe it and say like, look, this is where you're at. This is what you're doing, and if you want to work towards something else, then we'll pause and then just go see how we can do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. So, like you mentioned, talking to kind of targeting Jewish dads, and I think that's great when you can kind of have a niche like that where you can relate to them on other levels and in other ways other than around the physical activity and that kind of thing. I think that can be really helpful, especially when it's with food, because I know I had a Jewish client recently who I had to learn a little bit more about some of their cultural things to make sure that some of the things that we were talking about related to food and stuff like that was appropriate, that I wasn't recommending like, hey, what do you think about this idea, and that being completely like inappropriate for how they would have their meals and that kind of thing. So I think that's really cool that you target that. How does that look with like in the context of intuitive eating, when you start to factor in the cultural things, maybe some of the specific things that you find with Jewish people?
Sure. I think one thing is just like kind of a little more external, like schedule things, how it looks, and then the other thing is like a Jewish outlook, and if it applies to different Jewish laws or anything. So in terms of the first thing, in terms of like a schedule, so a lot of people have children and they take them to school, they take them back, just like carpool, and that's not so new. At the same time, there's some of the Jewish men have they try to go learn Torah, so Jewish studies, either like maybe before work and then after work in the evenings. So it's like definitely a lot on the plate, and with all of that, it's just there's definitely a drive to make sure that someone is working and has their livelihood taken care of, and then there's also there. So sometimes it's just like seeing that understanding in a like just a one-on-one basis that, yeah, I definitely know what you're going through right now. There's a lot going on, and how can we make this work? So that's like schedule-wise. So it's just something we have common grounds on. And the other thing is like a Jewish outlook on things. So it's maybe I'll be talking with someone and they kind of shift into like, well, I used to look like this when I was in college and I was this active, and I really want to get back towards that. So I think intuitive eating kind of blends very well with a Jewish outlook on like we're going to do something that's not hurting ourselves, but it's going to be something that's going to be healthy for us. And we know that like the exterior, like those ideas, like what we look like, it's not the be all end all.
Yeah.
And maybe on the side we can talk about like how some people take like your body as a business card, and like that like the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. That'd be something interesting. In terms of the Jewish approach, it's easy to like say, look, we have Jewish laws. Like, yes, we do want to be able to take care of ourselves. At the same time, we want to do it in a normal way. Like, I'm not going to tell you like, okay, 4 times a week, it's an hour and that's it. And if you can't do it, then you're not my client. Like no, like we're going to make it work. And I think that's like perfect with intuitive eating. Like, you know where the person is, and anything you're going to be doing is going to be a gain.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's a important, I think, to be able to understand some of those specific things that, whether it's the schedule, like you said, being a parent, and then also the cultural customs and stuff. I know I found myself as I'm a Christian. And so I find that when I work with other Christians, we can actually look at things. We can talk about certain things from a perspective that I can't with my non-Christian clients, because there are certain faith aspects that I can bring in and relate to the intuitive eating process. Like you mentioned, the appearance thing. That's something that obviously out for people who aren't Jewish or who aren't Christian, we can still say, hey, focusing on outward appearance isn't necessarily going to be the best thing. What are some other things that we can focus on? But when we're also able to bring in those core beliefs about who we are as human beings, and and we can bring that into the conversation and say, hey, maybe even bring up a passage from the Torah or from the Bible or whatever, and work that in there as, hey, remember this part, and they can sort of relate their faith to what they're learning through intuitive eating. And I think that can be really helpful. And so it's often really helpful to be able to understand those cultural aspects that we can bring in. Or, and the same thing, if you observe the Sabbath and that kind of thing, and that's a very important part and aspect, and even food choices and the feasts and festivals and those kinds of things, those are all factors that come into play in our relationship with food. And so do you find that is something that do people find a freedom when they realize that, hey, their cultural customs are healthy and can be very healthy, where maybe before they thought, well, if I eat this certain way, they tell me that's not healthy. I don't know. Do you run into any of that kind of thing in Judaism?
Yeah, it's like there's, like you were talking about, there's the Sabbath, there's Shabbos. So every Friday night to Saturday night, turn off the phones, and we have festive meals, I guess you can call them, and they're usually big meals. There's challah, there's bread, and so I'll talk to people. It's like, yeah, challah is like the worst nightmare. It's like that's, and we have to have it three times in a day, so they kind of feel overwhelmed with that. And then like when other holidays come up, Sukkot, Passover, those are not only we have the Sabbath, but then a couple days in a row of a lot of big meals. And for some people, it's just very overwhelming. And so I'm able to work with them, and they see that there's an approach that allows you to, like, number one, still enjoy all the food, and probably to even a greater level than you had before. And then number two is like feel totally fine and not overstuffed hardly anymore. And like the whole nother appreciation for the holiday at that point, when food is like not some scary thing, it's just really integral part of the holiday, and it's really enjoyed instead of really scary.
Yeah, I think that's really important that people, because all those feasts and those celebrations, those are not just things to do. They're integral parts of your faith. They're ways that you express your faith, that you live out your faith, that you relate to God and those kinds of things. And it's, it's not just, it's not just a matter of do this, follow these rules. You want to enjoy that. You want to connect with that experience if you want to really make the most of that time. And so if you're constantly worried, like, oh, I have to eat bread again, even if and it's one thing if you just hate bread, if you don't like the taste of it, that's a different thing. But if you actually like it, but you're sitting there worried about, oh, I'm going to gain weight after this, or I shouldn't be eating this, or, oh, it's going to give me diabetes, or, all kinds of things that go through our head because of the diet culture that we live in. That takes away from that connection with whether it's with family, with God, with, your whole, the whole experience. So I'm sure that has been helpful for people to really find that freedom in that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like you said, like when able to integrate it and kind of see that their experience now compared to months before, how they would experience the Shabbos, totally different.
Mm-hmm.
They're on a different level, like just physically, and then they have more room for their family and for faith and for that. So they found a new freedom. It's great.
Yeah. Do you have any tips that you give people who are maybe new to it to kind of make some peace with some of those foods, those practices, and that kind of thing? What are some things that you do with your clients, or that you would recommend for anybody who's listening?
Yeah, sure. I think definitely this is stuff from the intuitive eating workbook, and like around understanding and feeling fullness cues. So one of the easier ones to start off with people is that, so they have their meal and then maybe 10, 15 minutes in, they just put in like a little break and they sit back a little bit. So there's a little physical change, and then give them a couple cues to see how they're feeling. Like, what's your stomach feel like? How's the food tasting? Are you still getting the same like richness and the salts and all the flavors? Or are those starting to change? And then like nothing too crazy. And then, okay, go on with your meal. And then another maybe 20 minutes later, if you start to see that the plates are starting to clear, see what's happening. Does that same piece of food taste the same, or are you actually noticing like it's a little more muted and you're starting to fill up?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good one. That's a one that I like to use also. It's because it's real practical. And I know you have an engineering background. I do too, in software engineering. And so I always like very rational things that just make sense. And that's one of the things that I always liked with the hunger and fullness principles of intuitive eating. It's only 2 of the 10, but it's a couple that just makes so much sense. It's like, oh yeah, so my body, if it's telling me, yeah, it's hungry, it's probably because it needs energy, so I should probably give it. But at the same time, it's going to give me signals to tell me when I've had enough, when it doesn't need any more. And I think that's a great one. And yeah, like you were saying, sometimes just taking that little pause in the middle, a couple things. One is it gives you a chance to let your body register that you've been eating, because those hormones are the things that are some of those chemical messengers that send those signals that tell our body, tell us that we've had enough. But it also is kind of a good thing, a good reminder to pause and reconnect with what's going on. That's another thing that I always find helpful, is especially in a social or a celebratory environment, taking that moment to pause and say, oh, okay, I'm going to step back and I'm going to listen to the conversation, or I'm going to throw something in myself. And that can help give you something to do other than eat, while you're kind of deciding, do I need any more? Do I want any more? Would it be more satisfying if I continued eating, or am I completely satisfied now? And those kinds of questions. So, do you find that that intuitive eating, the principles, do they seem to mesh well with the Judaic practices and customs? Do you ever run into any conflict with any of them, that with any of your beliefs, specific? I was kind of curious about that.
Yeah, and this is like something that took a little more time and like a little more depth into intuitive eating and healthy exercise, to finally like put some things together. Definitely a lot of the principles line up well. Like there's different learnings from like oral tradition that talk about like, okay, so make sure that you're not eating like you're not too full in terms of that. And then also with like separating ourselves from diet mentality, it's also a very strong idea in Judaism. Like we have like our rabbis and our people that we go to for our source of knowledge, and if we have questions, to go there. So to be able to just like separate ourselves from our environment, also applies here. Like, okay, so maybe the diet mentality is not something so healthy. Like, oh, but a lot of people are doing it. Like, okay, yeah, but it's not so healthy. So then it's like there's like a reframe and kind of like working it in. So like definitely like using your intellect to make everything make sense is a big idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that comes up with me from my Christian faith, which, you know, we're going to have very similar principles in a lot of those ways, is the, you know, I've had people somewhat resistant to the idea when I've talked about being more being non-judgmental, or not looking at things as mistakes and rather learning experiences and that kind of thing, and taking that to think, oh well, you know, that's just a very you know, that's just this modern viewpoint where there's no right or wrong. It's just whatever is true for you is, you know, that kind of mentality. And I think one of the things, you know, as an example, you know, thinking of calling out things as sinful or right or wrong, you know, based on objective moral standards. You know, you have the Torah, and that there are objective moral adultery is wrong, you know, those kinds of things, and lying is wrong, you know, those kinds of things. But and I think sometimes people mix up the right and wrong, and they start applying it to food. So they start to look at food as like this, like taking a non-judgmental attitude toward food is very different than taking a non-judgmental attitude toward moral issues. And have you really thought through that yourself much, or had any pushback when you encourage people to take a much more gentle, relaxed approach around food, where they view it maybe as a lack of discipline, a lack of where maybe they're trying to be more disciplined in their spiritual life, but now you're almost telling them to be a little bit less in the way that they look at their food, or less rigid and that kind of thing. Any thoughts on that? I know I didn't mention that ahead of time to you to give you a heads up, but I was kind of curious your thoughts on that, since we kind of been talking about this a little.
Right. So like this point also is something like that I try to go more into depth with some of the guys, that like, well, if I equate sugar and like a soda to being something unhealthy, and then, well, that's like also the black and white, then every time I go get soda, then that's something that's bad. That's something that's no good. It's like that. So that mindset is still kind of around, and the thoughts around sugar and those things like still exist. So it's not like everyone in the Orthodox community is intuitive eaters. There's still like the idea that like, oh no, like, yeah, we have some sweets, but we really shouldn't. So it's like a hard balance. Like, yes, it's like nice to enjoy, but don't overdo it.
Yeah. Well, that's that curiosity stuff that can always be helpful with intuitive eating, is to go in and reflect on, you know, why it is that maybe you ate more than was comfortable, and all of that good stuff. Yeah, this has been a really good conversation. I've really enjoyed talking to you on this. I think there's a lot of good, helpful things in here. So maybe what you can do now is just let people know how they can connect with you if they are interested in working with you. Love for you to provide them information on how they can get in touch with you, and I'll include that in the show notes too.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I've been on Instagram, Aleman _coaching. This is my last name, and coaching. And yeah, there I've had some posts and kind of different tips and things that we've discussed today, and then other kind of like food for thought types of questions to kind of that help me transition from like diet culture to more of intuitive eating ideas. So that's Instagram. You can message me there, and we can set up a strategy conversation and see where you're holding, and see what it looks like to work together. And the other thing I'm doing is like for some of the people in the Jewish community, they have like WhatsApp is really big, and we have lots of groups. So I have a group there, and I send similar ideas and questions, and have conversations in that fashion as well. So if you want like more of a community kind of aspect, so that's a great place to start too.
Yeah, that is great. I know a lot of a lot of people are really benefit from a group environment and that group kind of coaching and the community where you can just bounce ideas off each other, rather than just sort of asking your coach a question and having them give you an answer. It can be nice to have multiple people chime in and say, hey, well, this worked for me, or I tried this one time, and kind of hearing from more than one source can be really helpful. So that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, glad you're doing that. All right. Well, thanks again for joining me. I really enjoyed our conversation and look forward to continuing to follow you on Instagram and connecting, and maybe have you on again at some point to talk about another interesting topic and that kind of thing. So always look forward to reading your content and talking with you. So
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And we'll be in touch. I'd love to see what you're doing and how your groups and your work is going. Definitely like to build each other up.